The mystery at the Battle of St. Lo. During the 8-day siege of St. Lo, the First Army under General Courtney Hodges hammered away at the Nazis with everything they had. Gradually, they effected the breakthrough. The Americans, performing deeds beyond belief time and again, were pinned down, caught in the relentless crossfire of the German 88s. A squad of GIs led by Sergeant Joel Dearborn found themselves cut off from the main body of troops during a skirmish. They took cover in a partially demolished building, which was somewhat in the open, surrounded by a field on one side and a broad avenue on the other. Their position was precarious, unable to retreat because of the withering fire from machine guns and not too distant 88s, which had them zeroed in. It became apparent that they were hopelessly trapped. It was imperative that the sergeant get back to headquarters because his detail had been scouring the German outposts and had vital information concerning several gun emplacements, which had to be knocked out before the army could move further up. Man, why I wouldn't give to see a couple of those Shermans right about now, the sergeant said to a private beside whom he had been crouching beneath a shot-out window. Yeah, that's the only thing that would get us out of this spot, a tank. A big old tank. Almost as if in reply to their wish, the welcome sound of an approaching Sherman tank could be heard above the gunfire. It skirted the perimeter of the field beyond and turned its guns on the machine gun nests, which had been chattering away at the trapped GIs without a break for more than an hour. 3 shots from the tank scored direct hits on the hidden machine gun positions. The rain of bullets ceased. The men in the ruins cried out jubilantly, and then, just as they were poised to begin making a break across the open, an 88 thundered, then another, and another launched a salvo of shells at their position. A direct hit was scored, killing all but the sergeant and the man beside him. They crouched in the building, hardly daring to peer outside as the shells continued to explode all around them. Then the tank's engine was heard again. The private crept across the floor amid the rubble and corpses of his buddies. He looked out and said, "Look it, the tank's going up the hill after the 88s." Several minutes later, they watched the great tank train its guns on the German artillery position camouflaged behind a wall at the top of the hill. It opened fire, and then, with its guns spin shell after shell at the Germans, the tank began to drive right up to the emplacement. Realizing that the German artillery had stopped firing on their position for the moment, Sergeant Dearborn tapped the infantryman's shoulder and made a gesture with his thumb. They darted out of the ruins, and running zigzag across the open, they raced to safety. Just as they got to cover in a clump of trees off the road, they saw the tank explode and burst into flames. Both men felt sick. They turned away in silence and hurried back to their lines. After they had reported to headquarters and the sergeant had turned his information over to the officer in command, he relayed the incident of the tank and thanked him for having ordered it up to get them out. "I didn't send the tank up there," the sergeant was told. "In fact, every available tank is in action up the line. There isn't a single tank here now, and there won't be until later this afternoon. You must be mistaken." Before the sergeant could say anything else, the German guns began to thunder again, raining their position with exploding shells. Several days later, after the Battle of St. Lo had been won, the sergeant went back to the hill where the tank had been to look for the remains of the charred hulk. A sentry at the top of the hill challenged, "Hey, Mac, just where the hell do you think you're going?" "I wanted to take a look at the tank that shied out with the Germans 3 days ago. I saw it myself. They took an 88 and blew up." The GI sentry shook his head from side to side slowly, and continued to nod as he said, "You got the wrong dope, Mac. Ain't any shot-up tanks up here. Never was, either. But I tell you, I saw it. It got us out of a tight squeeze. We were pinned down in that building over there. That tank saved our lives. Look, Mac, take a good look," the GI said warily. "Now tell me if you see any tanks out there. And another thing, notice how soft the ground is on that hill? If a tank had driven up here, When you say it did, don't you think there'd at least be tracks in the ground? Well, where are they? Go on and see for yourself. Sergeant Dearborn did not look for himself. He could not locate any tank tracks whatsoever, nor even the remains of the Sherman tank. He walked around for a while, then stood silent as he looked down the hill he had just climbed. In the soft earth he could see his own footprints, the only evidence that convinced him that he was there. The uncanny appearance of a tank that had made it possible for Sergeant Joel Dearborn and one surviving member of his squad to escape from certain death is wholly unexplainable. However, what counts is that the sergeant was able to deliver valuable information to his superiors, which helped the Allies save many lives and cut short a battle that most certainly would have taken longer to win. Several weeks later, Sergeant Joel Dearborn was killed in action. The private who had been with him that day in July 1944 returned to his home in New York after the war and finished his schooling under the GI Bill. He is now a clinical psychologist whose hobby is psychical research.